Wasn't Richard Nixon a criminal? Wasn't he despised by all decent people? No, he wasn't.
Hey folks, Tennessee Brando here for MeidasTouch. You know, going into 2023, I knew we were going to see some crazy things from the far right. I knew they would turn up the heat. I knew they would throw all kinds of shit at the wall, and I was braced for it. But there's one thing I wasn't prepared for, and that is the clip I'm about to show you of Tucker Carlson. Because here he is praising none other than Richard Nixon. Yeah, you heard me right. And that's something that I've said about the far right for years. It's like, you know what? They'll go back and they'll praise Ronald Reagan. And every now and then they'll even throw George W. Bush a bone. But there's no way they'll ever talk about Nixon because of what a stain he left on their party. And if you go past Richard Nixon back further, you have Dwight Eisenhower, whose stances today on stuff like Social Security and Medicare would definitely not make him at all in line with MAGA Republicans. And they're sure not going to talk about Herbert Hoover before that. So about as far back as they'll go is Ronald Reagan. They'll never praise Nixon. I always said that. And then Tucker Carlson said, hold my beer. I'm going to go on my show and I'm going to defend one of the biggest criminals in American history. And if you don't believe me, here's the clip. Check it out.
So if you want to understand, if you really want to understand how the American government actually works at the highest levels, and if you want to know why they don't teach history anymore, one thing you should know is that the most popular president in American history was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon. Yet somehow, without a single vote being cast by a single American voter, Richard Nixon was kicked out of office and replaced by the only unelected president in American history. So we went from the most popular president to a president nobody voted for. Wait a minute, you may ask. Why didn't I know that? Wasn't Richard Nixon a criminal? Wasn't he despised by all decent people? No, he wasn't. In fact, if any president could claim to be the people's choice, it was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was reelected in 1972 by the largest margin of the popular vote ever recorded before or since. Nixon got 17 million more votes than his opponent.
Well, I have to say that's a new low even for Tucker Carlson. To go back in time, find the most disgraced president in American history, Richard Nixon, and find a way to make it look like he was a victim too, is a low that I didn't think he could go to, but hey, he's proved to us time and time again that he will go even lower, so I'm sure within the next week or two, he will outdo this. It's not a surprise, but it's actually very strategic on his part, and I'll tell you why. Richard Nixon was a guy who messed up, who broke the law, who was a criminal, who was a crook, even though he said he wasn't. He clearly was one. And when he realized he was cornered, when he realized he was going to be held accountable, whether he liked it or not, he actually went ahead and resigned from office before he could be removed. Because he at least accepted, let's give Nixon this, he at least accepted a little accountability and a little responsibility and saying, hey, maybe it's best that I just go ahead and step down and get out of the way for the good of the whole country. And that was at a time when a president could do something like that, and then both parties could say, okay, let's move forward, let's try to heal the nation. And even the Republican Party back then could say, hey, yeah, he was a crook, let's move past him. They go on, they elect Ronald Reagan years later, and they try to rebrand themselves as the moral majority after Nixon completely wrecked their party. That was a time in American history when a president could at least accept a little accountability. So I will give Nixon that. At least he did accept what was coming down on him and just go ahead and resign before it could happen. But what Trump did was he wasn't able to accept the results of a fair and honest election. After all the recounts, after all the court trials, after all the evidence came in showing that there was no election fraud, he's still out there repeating the lie that the election was stolen. He caused an insurrection. He caused a riot on our nation's capital, and he's still out there preaching that same thing that he's been saying ever since the election day of 2020. And so if you're Tucker Carlson and you're the far right news hosts that are trying to push this narrative and trying to paint Trump as innocent, well, the best way to do that is to go back and find the most disgraced crook in history and let's paint him as a victim. Let's tell our viewers that, oh, this has been going on even since Richard Nixon. What the left didn't tell you was that Richard Nixon was one of the most popular presidents ever. What the left didn't tell you was that Nixon really didn't do no wrong. He really didn't break no laws. It was just the deep state. It was just the evil liberals coming after him. And if they go back and paint that picture all those years ago, then as they come forward, they could point to any time a Republican was ever held accountable and say, well, that was simply the evil liberals coming after him. It feeds into their narrative. Tucker Carlson and Fox News is becoming InfoWars 2.0. That's what they're becoming. They're leaning more and more into that shtick because they realize that that gimmick sells with MAGA Republicans. And they are going to ride this gimmick, and some people don't like that I call it that, but it is. It's a brand. It's a style that they realize sells to angry people who wants to feel oppressed. And that's what this boils down to. They have to feed this narrative to angry people who wants to feel like they're the most oppressed people in the world. And so to do that, they have to justify everything Donald Trump did. They have to make him look innocent in everything that he's done. And to do that, they have to go back and erase and have a clean slate for all the other crooks in their party. So it's actually pretty strategic on their part. If they can convince their viewers that Richard Nixon was actually a saint, then the people will say, hey, we was wrong about Nixon, and maybe there's more about Trump we didn't know, and maybe Trump was right all along. And it just simply feeds further into their narrative. It's pretty sickening the way they continue to rewrite history. It's pretty sickening the way that news anchors on Fox News are doing their best Alex Jones impressions. It's pretty sickening that that is the way they're preconditioning their viewers. But that's what they're all about these days. They're not about facts. They're not about the truth. They're not interested in that. They're about preconditioning their viewers to believe what they say before it ever happens. And so that's what this whole thing is about. If they can convince the crowd that Richard Nixon was okay in what he did, then they can come forward and they can give every Republican who's ever been called into any question a pass because, oh, it's the deep state. It's the evil liberal Democrats. So, yeah, I mean, Tucker Carlson has hit a new low, and I'm sure he will outdo himself. I'm sure somewhere on a panel at Fox News, they say, hey, Tucker, how low can you go? And he just says, hold my beer. I can go lower. So as long as Tucker Carlson is out there spewing his rhetoric and his garbage, those of us here on MeidasTouch is going to have to continue to spew a little bit of reality and spew a little bit of facts and continue to remind you of what a crook Richard Nixon really was and what a crook Donald Trump really is. And both of them, Richard Nixon at least was held accountable, and it's time we hold Trump accountable. That's what our job here at MeidasTouch should be from now on. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it, and I hope you guys hit that subscribe button, share the videos, let everyone know about MeidasTouch. It's the fastest growing news network in the country, and I'm proud to be a part of it. So until next time, I'm Tennessee Brando. You guys keep tuning in, and we'll keep telling you the truth.
Our blue wall stopped the red wave and election deniers got denied election. That's why we're celebrating with the new Democracy Prevails team. We've got lots of work to do, but we should all be proud that when democracy was tested, democracy prevailed. You've earned this. Don't wait. Get yours right now at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.